It was one of those moments when it felt like we were standing on holy ground. Ash Wednesday, the start of Lent this year. And I was due to go and see Brian Jocelyn, a 94-year-old member of our church family, to share communion with him in the nursing home that he was in. But the onset of pneumonia had brought a different dimension to this visit. It was clear that Brian was moving towards the end of his life. Brian, together with his wife Margaret, had been members of St. Michael's since the early 1960s, both very active, dedicated servants of the Lord. Margaret died about 10 years ago, and in the years that followed, it's been quite beautiful to see the way in which church family have been like family to Brian, sharing meals, offering lifts, showing kindness and care. And so it was on that afternoon of Ash Wednesday that I found myself joined by a number of others in an informal communion service around Brian's bedside. Not only did we share bread and wine together, but we shared stories as well. Memories of life shared with Brian over the years. Moments when we'd really experienced God's presence with us. For Carol Thayer, a member of the Art and Soul life group that Brian was part of, and who felt a particular call from God to support Brian in these last years, the highlight was a party she organised last autumn for his 94th birthday. The party was aircraft-themed in honour of his years at British Aerospace. Brian dressed up as Captain Jocelyn of Brian Air, flying Flight 94, with his cabin crew comprised of those closely involved in Brian's daily care. It was a joyful, memorable celebration. Carol shared a tribute to Brian at his Thanksgiving service down in the lower hall on Maundy Thursday. And so many people have played a part in helping Brian live in these latter years. And I couldn't help thinking that with no family of his own, these years could have played out very differently. It really has been a picture of church family at its best, a beautiful expression of love being given and received in little acts of service, but little things that have made a world of difference and enriched both giver and receiver. It's been the stuff of the kingdom, love. And it's this love that we're going to be thinking about this morning, and this, the first of our sermon series, looking at the practice of service in our Practicing the Way sermon themes. Chris Reveley did a great job last week, reminding us of the practices we've covered over the last 2 to 3 years. Sabbath, fasting, prayer, solitude, generosity, and community. And if you missed last week's sermon, it really is worth catching up online if you can. But lest you're in danger of thinking, oh no, please don't ask me to add something more to my already full life, it is worth reminding ourselves of the vision behind the Practicing the Way initiative. Because it's absolutely not about loading us down with more and more obligations. It's about helping us make intentional choices about the way we live, learning to live the way that Jesus lived, learning to live in a way that will help us flourish as human beings, created as we are in God's image. It's about freedom, not obligation. So the 3 goals that underpin all that Practicing the Way is about are these: to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do as Jesus did. What's not to like about those? And these 9 spiritual practices are designed to help us shape our lives around these goals. As I said before, it's not about having to tick all the boxes and running the risk of exhausting ourselves in the process, but it's about building these practices into our lives little by little in the way that's right for us at this particular stage of our faith journey. And that can actually be quite exciting. So I think I mentioned last week that my husband Chris and I have just finished leading a post-Alpha group with a group of people who've recently done the Alpha course. And we've been using the Practicing the Way basic course that introduces us to some of these practices. And it's been quite wonderful to witness God at work firsthand. People taking little steps, but significant steps, to build these practices into their lives, to be more intentional about their spiritual formation. So I'm really excited that we're going to be taking a look at another of these practices in the coming weeks, service. And where better to start than with the thing that Jesus says trumps everything else, love. When asked by a religious leader which was the greatest commandment in the law, Jesus replied like this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbour as yourself. Jesus links these two goals together. They're inseparable. He seems to be saying that the way that we love others is directly connected to, and perhaps even revealing of, the state of our heart towards God. So how do we get an accurate picture of the true state of our heart? How do we measure our spiritual temperature? Well, I don't think it's always about whether we feel close to God or distant from him. I'm reminded of Mother Teresa, who poured her life out to serve the Lord and the people that he'd placed her amongst, who really lived to make a difference and to inspire others, but who confessed in her later years that she often felt distant from God. And I don't think it's necessarily about whether we feel spiritually strong or weak. I can think of times in my own life when I felt desperately weak, but somehow there's been a strength in it because it's made me lean more on God. We're strong when we feel weak, and our brokenness complete goes a song that we often used to sing. The spiritual life and how we experience it can be counterintuitive. But at the same time, I do believe it's possible for us to become lukewarm in our love for Jesus. Remember these salutary words to the angel of the church in Laodicea that we find in Revelation chapter 3. I know your deeds, that you're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were one or the other. So because you're lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. That's not a great picture, is it? I don't want to be accused of someone being lukewarm. So back to the question we posed: how do we measure our spiritual temperature? Well, we find the answer in the Bible reading that we had just now from Matthew chapter 7. We look for the fruit. By their fruit you will recognize them. Every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. So I wonder what the state of the tree of your life is in right now. Maybe it feels like you're in a fruitful season. There's lots of opportunity for you to bear good fruit. And if that's you, that's fabulous. Keep going, keep growing. But it may be for some of us, it's not such an encouraging picture. We're all too aware that we weren't as patient with our kids, with our partner before we set out to come to church this morning as we could have been. That a colleague at work with their irritating ways got the better of us last week. That we didn't give our neighbour the time they needed because we were rushing to get to the shop. It happens, doesn't it? And this isn't about giving ourselves a hard time when we get it wrong. It's much more about heightening our self-awareness so that at least we stand a better chance of making a better choice next time round. Jesus often used analogies from nature, of fruit, of seed, of gardening, of agriculture in his teaching. And I love the passage in John 15, part of his teaching in the Last Supper, when he says this: I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He paints a picture of his Father at work tending the vine, cutting off the branches that don't bear fruit and pruning those that do, so that they can be even more fruitful, and encouraging us to stay connected. Again, that's the whole point of the trellis that we often refer to as part of practicing the way. These are the practices that help us stay connected, stay healthy, and grow to our potential. And you know, God really, really wants us to live fruitful lives. It's to the Father's glory if we do. So he's absolutely going to help us do it. And remember, he's the gardener. But we do also have a responsibility to look after the ground conditions of our lives, to do what we can to nurture our spiritual lives so that they can be more fruitful. Paul writes this to the Christians in Colossae, not the Colossians in Colossae. So then, just as you received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in him, rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. You know, thankfulness is a great nutrient to put into the ground. If you're stuck for anything else to do, start by giving thanks. And another one is trust. My appreciation of the importance of the season of winter grew hugely when I better understood what goes on underground when everything above seems to be bleak and bare. There are seasons in life when we simply need to trust that the gardener knows what he's doing. The cycle of nature tells us that not every season will be obviously fruitful, but they'll all be doing an important work. Healthy plants with strong roots draw life from the soil where they're planted and bear fruit in season. So let's get thinking about this fruit the practice of service expressed in love might yield. What could that look like for us? Well, it's really very, very simple. In fact, the simpler, the better. Think for a moment about the ordinary people and the everyday encounters in your life. How might you simply and humbly do something little to express God's love? We had a great starter, didn't we, this morning in our all-age section. So maybe you could take the initiative to wash up, load the dishwasher after lunch today. Or maybe you could pick up the phone and ring the person who's been on your mind this week. Or is there someone you know who's struggling to get to church, or a group they're part of that you're involved with? Maybe you could offer to pick them up and bring them. That's where it all started with Carol and Brian. Or maybe you could make some time to play a game with your children or grandchildren, or go for coffee or a walk with a friend who's on their own. There are any number of little things that we could do to show love. So let's use our imaginations and ask God to bring ideas and opportunities to us. And let's prepare to be surprised. Little things really can and do make a difference. I'm reminded of a lady called Gilda who used to live in Stoke, Gifford. I met her out walking our first Springer Spaniel, Tessie, many, many years ago. And from time to time, we'd stop and have a friendly chat, nothing heavy. She lived with her brother, and at times that could be a tricky dynamic. Well, one afternoon, she turned up distraught on my doorstep because they'd had a massive row. She felt she had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. And you know, it is frightening how terribly alone some people in our community are. Well, I helped her make a decision about what to do next, and thankfully things soon settled and she was able to return home. Some years later, her brother died, and then a few years after that, Gilda herself was diagnosed with cancer. Whilst there was definitely a limit to what I could realistically do to support her, I was able to introduce her to a couple of other people from church, and together we were privileged to walk that final part of her journey with her. And you know, I truly believe that Gilda experienced the love of Jesus in a transformative way at that time. It was a humbling thing to witness and a huge privilege to be part of. It wasn't much from our point of view, but it was significant for Gilda. And it all started off with a casual conversation whilst out walking our dog. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that every little thing we do might lead to something bigger. That might scare some of us off from getting involved at all. But the point is this: we never know the impact that the little things might have on someone. Even without what followed for Gilda, the fact that someone stopped to talk to her whilst out walking made a difference. It made her feel less lonely and isolated. The little things matter in themselves. And remember what Jesus said in his parable about the sheep and the goats? Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Love in the way of Jesus isn't just a feeling or a good intention. It's embodied action. It's meeting the practical needs of others, even when it might cost us something. And very often it comes down to a choice and an action. There's a book we came across very early on in our marriage by a couple called Carol and Jack Mayhall. It's called Marriage Takes More Than Love. I remember it being quite formative for us as we set off on our own adventure of marriage. Every chapter started with the words, choosing to listen, choosing to understand, choosing to forgive, choosing to have fun. And the wisdom in this book isn't at all confined to marriage. These daily choices to show love in practical, concrete ways will help any relationship grow to become healthy and life-giving, to bear good fruit. Because relationships can be a battleground, can't they? We rub each other up the wrong way. We hurt each other, sometimes without even knowing it. We misunderstand each other. We see the same situation from very different perspectives. Paul, writing to the Christians in Rome, wrote this: love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Is there a relationship you're in when it feels like there's something of a battle going on? How could you show love in the choices you make to try and find a way forward? Remember, our Father's absolutely committed to helping us to bear good fruit. So ask him to show you what you could do, and then to give you the courage and grace you need to do it. So as we draw to a close in looking at this practice of love and the way it's evidenced in the fruit that we might be visible in our lives, I want to take us back to Matthew's Gospel, to another story that Jesus told about how trees can be recognized by their fruit, good or bad. At the beginning of Matthew 12, Jesus allows something controversial to happen. His disciples are hungry, so they walk through the grain fields, and as they do so, they pick the heads of grain and eat them. What's the problem, you might be thinking? Well, it happens on a Sabbath, and Jewish tradition says that picking grain is work, so not allowed on the Sabbath. The religious leaders weren't happy. They were even less happy when Jesus went on to the synagogue and healed someone with a withered hand. Jesus was being deliberately provocative because he had a point to make. Rather, he wanted to let them know that in obsessing about the letter of the law, they were missing the point. All spiritual practice is meant to make us become people of love, people who have a deepening experience of God's love for us to a degree that it frees us to increasingly serve others with the same kind of self-giving love. I came back to what I said earlier. It's not about obligation, it's about freedom. But that said, when we give ourselves away to show love in practical ways to others, we're actually the ones that benefit most. We get to live healthy, fruitful lives. So let me leave you with this question. Who are the people God's put in your life that you might be able to express love to? Let me encourage you to start small and to start today. I'm going to invite Nathan and the band to come back up to lead us back into a time of worship. And as always, there's an opportunity to respond to anything that God may have been speaking to us about this morning. Maybe for some of us that we're feeling the season we're in is winter. It's like winter. It feels a bit barren and bare up above. It doesn't feel like there's much fruit. And if that's you today, we'd love just to pray that God will renew your trust in him, the gardener. Help you to trust him, that he knows what he's doing, and you'll find your way through. Or it may be that a particular relationship has become a battleground in your life. It could be in the family, it could be at work, it could be anywhere. And you really want to have a chance to make it a bit better, a bit different. We'd love to pray that God would give you wisdom to know what that might look like, and then the courage to follow through. Or maybe, as I read that scripture from Revelation, you're just aware that something's become a bit lukewarm in your spiritual life. Would you know, all it needs is for us to ask the Lord to reignite that passion. We've sung it already, haven't we? Light a passion in my soul, in my heart. So if that's you, we'd love to pray that God will do that with you and for you. And if you've never met Jesus, perhaps you're here and church is new for you, well, we'd love to introduce you to him, the one who loves us with a deep, unfailing love. Or it may be that you just feel a bit small and insignificant in life. It's hard for you to believe that anything you could do would make a difference. That is true for some of us, I think. If that's you, it would be great just to bless you, to affirm you in the Father's love, and to pray that he'll give you opportunities and encouragement to take those little steps to make a difference. So I'd love to invite you to stand if you are able to, and let's pray as we respond in worship and as the prayer ministry team make their way forward.